We are doing what is called systems theory in international relations. It's very important to know what actually is the systems theory. And systems, in fact, it's not called systems theory. More accurately, this is a systems approach. This is a systems approach. This approach is applied first in biology, and later it went to all the disciplines, including psychology, sociology, and in international relations, Morton Kaplan published a book, Systems and Process in International Politics, in 1957. Systems and process in international politics. Okay. What did Kaplan mean by the systems theory? Okay. He has one idea of systems theory. And so he writes about one application of systems theory in a neurology that is used to study brain. Okay. So this is what he says about this study. The most concise and most original account of systems theory, using the word theory, occurs in Rose Ashby's design for a brain. Ashby and his colleague Gray Walter developed system theory in order to explore analogous for certain aspects of the brain functioning. Gray Walter designed a machine with a motor and headlights that was capable of plugging itself into a wall socket to recharge its battery when its headlights began to wear down, and of plugging itself into a gas pump when its engine began to run out of fuel. Okay. So to him this is most original. And he says, this is an analogy. They did not mistake this for the real brain system. They were able to explore how to produce a simplified version of certain observed behaviors. So Kaplan's point is, there is a brain, very complex, all kinds of connections like this. But create a model. If there are many variables here, take only few variables. And work out how these variables related. In fact, how they are working together to produce a particular outcome. So this is real and this is a model. Real is very complex and model is a simplified version of the complexity. If we can make, or if we can get the connection between variables right, then we will see we can successfully make it work. Then we can assume our understanding of the interrelationship across the variables is true in the reality. It means model is a simplification of the reality. Model is a simplification. Simplify. Get the connections across the variables. So in that, produce a theory. Theory is after all about the generalizations, about the relations across the variables. Okay. So in his ideal system of system theory of brain, so this one is able to do certain things on its own. It is able to recharge itself. So Walter's idea is that what is going on in this machine is something similar to what is going on in the mind. Okay, Morton was writing in 50s, but now we have very advanced robots. These are called robots now. But we are taking this simple machine to understand what is Kaplan's view of systems theory, because it is he who started it in international politics. His idea is like robo only.
And so, automatically, she takes avoiding action. Mrs. Walter's pet is Elmer, Elsie's brother, in the darker vest. He works in exactly the same way. Dr. Walter says that his electronic toys work exactly as though they have a simple two-cell nervous system, and that with more cells they will be able to do many more tricks. Already Elsie has one up on Elmer. When her batteries begin to fail, she automatically runs home to her kennel for charging up, and in consequence can live a much gayer life.
So we have seen how this is working. So his idea is, if you can make the machine work, it means you have understood how the brain is working. Machine is a simplified version of brain. So this he is calling as system theory. So to Kaplan, system theory is nothing but model building. Model building. You build models here of international politics. International politics. International politics in reality is very complex. You create a simplified models. Why is this so? Why is this so? To understand international politics, the complexity. To get relations across variables. Across variables. Okay. So this is helpful to bring theory. So you develop models of international politics, out of which you develop a theory. Okay. And this is what he says. This is an approach. He says the crux of the matter is whether regularities can be discovered which permit the organization of the materials of international politics within a simple framework of reasonable explanatory or predictive power. It is the thesis of this volume, the book, that a scientific politics can develop only if the materials of politics are treated in terms of the systems of action. So you have the data. How do you get the data here? Data is from history. The data is from comparisons, empirical. You get the data. Like Walter gets the data on brain from the study of the brain. You study history, international relations, and get the data. And out of you fit the data in terms of systems of action. That's how you build the models to derive the theory. And Kaplan is very clear that perhaps the first thing to be said about systems theory is that it is not a theory. No propositions about the real world can be derived from it, any more than propositions about physics can be derived from the calculus or from the methods of science in general. So systems, you use systems approach and build a model, and then from that you get generalizations. So this is a methodology. Calculus is a method, methods of science. So using systems approach, you should get particular outcomes. Systems approach itself is not the outcome. Okay. Now, next, what is meant by systems approach? A system is an abstraction of reality with certain distinguishing features within which are contained interrelated parts are called subsystems. Okay. You take something as a system. A system. You fix something as a boundary. Systems have boundaries. And outside the boundary is called environment. From environment, system takes what are called inputs. And system gives what are called outputs. And system has parts. These parts are called subsystems. Subsystems. and these subsystems are interrelated. Okay. Environment influences system. The idea that environment influences system and system influences environment refers to the concept of open system. Social systems are open systems. Opposite of open system is a closed system where environment doesn't impact the system. Okay. When subsystems are in a relationship which is stable, then you say they are in equilibrium. Equilibrium is a state where there is a harmonious relationship across parts and the relationship is stable. But when the relationship is changing, then disequilibrium will be produced, or you can say disequilibrium will produce change, or change outside will lead to disequilibrium. So stability is about equilibrium and change is disequilibrium. And the actors in the system are called states or alliance blocks, or even IGOs, intergovernmental organizations. These are called actors in the system. So you think about the entire thing. So this gives a broader view of system, which is also called man from Mars technique. Systems approach is called man from Mars because this gives a broader view. If you are studying subsystem, then it gives us broader view of subsystem. If you are studying system, broader view of system. So this in general is a systems approach. Okay. Then what international relations scholars did was they tried to build models of international politics. One important issue in international politics is about the polarity of the world. The world can be bipolar or multipolar. And system theories debated regarding which is a better thing in preventing war. And how states behave in a bipolar world and a multipolar world. But whenever the international political system was bipolar and multipolar, bipolar is after Second World War. Multipolar is 19th century or pre-Napoleonic era also multipolar. Okay. Early part of 20th century also is multipolar. And system theories debated which is better. Worlds, for example, is for bipolarity, whereas some others are for multipolarity. So number of poles was one issue in international politics systems analysis. Okay. And some people applied systems analysis not to the entire world, but to regions. For example, you can take South Asia as a system or Sub-Saharan Africa as a system, which means they are in the total system of international politics, they are subsystems. So you can apply a subsystem approach even to a subsystem. Okay, and some looked at the interconnections between the subsystems and the system. For example, Oren Young devised what is called discontinuities model, which stresses the growing interpenetration of the global or system-wide axis of international politics on the one hand, and several newly emerging but widely divergent regional bases of subsystems on the other hand. So regional subsystems can have unique features, and on some of them global impact can be less. So it means we can apply a systems approach to our region of Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, or here China. You can apply this. You can apply to Asian countries. So this is one way of looking at systems approach. So you look at subsystem and then work out the interaction with the system. So if this subsystem is the system, then outside the subsystem becomes environment. Okay. But what are you doing in this process? You are looking at historical aspects and you make generalizations and use those generalizations to study any subsystem. So essentially, system approach is moving away from specific countries, specific events, moving away from specific countries and specific events with an intention to generalize. And when you generalize, for example, suppose you know that multipolar system works in this particular way. If you generalize multipolar system works in this way, then you are getting understanding of entire world, international politics. But if there is a multipolar system in a particular sub-region, then also that is right. Or you suppose you make generalization on a bipolar system, then the bipolar system to the whole world has these features, and bipolar system to another part of world is also there. To that also it is relevant. So systems approach is about generalization. Okay. For example, somebody discussed about the conflict between rising power and old or status quo power between America and China, which is called Thucydides trap. So rising power versus already established power, status quo power. So how does some country become more powerful? How does this threaten the status quo? What happens? What happened across? That data is used to find out what happens now. So using history, using comparisons to be able to predict future, which means they will help in policy making. So essentially, system approach is a proposal to create a theory of international relations. Okay. But how far they have been successful? that is a different issue. For example, Raymond Iron says that even if you build a model on bipolarity, the real world will not go by the model. For example, the system depends on what the two poles concretely are, not only on the fact that they are two. So even if you get the generalization about bipolarity true, that generalization may not be true of the current bipolar model, because the current model is specifically two countries, which means the applicability of systems theory we'll have to be more careful about it. That's what he's saying. And Hadley Bull says the freedom of the model builder from the discipline of knowing at the world is what makes him dangerous. He slips easily into a dogmatism that empirical generalization does not allow, attributing to the model a connection with reality it doesn't have. So he is saying that model is not real, and so if you don't understand, you can come to dangerous conclusions. And John Terney says the system theorist concludes that he must be cautious against the confusing model building with reality building. Cautious against confusing model building with reality building. Model building is not the same thing as reality building. Since a model is only an analogous tool, it would be intellectually dangerous to assume that it represents the real world. So this criticism is about model not being equal to real world. Real world. Okay. This is true. One has to be careful about it. But more importantly, what is it that we have really succeeded in getting the generalizations after, even within the model? So how far are we, what generalizations did we arrive at, and how far did we reach using systems approach? Certain level of theory, that is even more questionable. But on the whole, thinking in terms of generalizations instead of certain specific countries and specific events, I think is a forward step. Okay. I think we need to look at things in a general way. I mean, I can just give you an example. Take, for example, Noam Chomsky. He is critical of US foreign policy. So when he is criticizing US violation of human rights and many other things, how should we understand him? If US is doing it, is it because US is like that, or is it because any superpower is like that? For example, if India is a superpower, will India behave differently? If China is superpower, will China behave differently? So, if we can develop models of how superpower behaves, or if we develop generalizations of how superpower behaves, then it helps even to evaluate a foreign policy. It basically makes us to think in terms of generalities rather than finding fault with a particular country. Okay, so definitely systems theory is a step forward, but what is very important here is that you can't say this person is a systems theory only when he is using the word system, inputs and outputs and equilibrium. That is a very limited use of the systems, limited way of thinking about using utility of systems approach. I think whoever is giving some generalizations, arriving at patterns, discussing these are the possibilities, okay, and making certain propositions that can be tested, then we can say that is systems approach as well.